Have you ever been in a situation where you dropped a pawn in the opening, got frustrated, and launched a non-sound attack, but the attack just never broke through and you lost the game? Well, in today's video, I'm going to show you a couple of concepts that help you play solid chess in a losing position. Iosif Dorfman, in his work The Method in Chess, argued that if for one of the players the static balance is negative, he must without hesitation employ dynamic means. What this essentially means is that players should only go for chaos when they are not able to reach stability. It's quite evident that once a game is settled down into an endgame, certain material advantages are not sufficient enough to win the game. Thus, instead of going for unsound attacks, we should try to consolidate our positions and allow trades that only lead to a favorable endgame. Let's take a look at an example. This is a game played between Valentina Gunina and Dronavali Harika. Here, white played the move king to d3, attacking this knight, or even go to c3, where it will fork the knight and the rook. However, black doesn't really have the time to go knight to b6, because there's this beautiful checkmate, knight to f1, and rook to g6 mate. So, black made a critical decision. He played the move bishop to f5 check, and then just sacrificed the exchange after knight f8 check. After a few moves, we reach to this rook versus knight endgame, and as we know, it is not sufficient for white to checkmate black in this situation, which means that black has managed to save himself while down in exchange. So what happens if stability cannot be reached? In this position, black has lost a pawn on a6, and after a few moves, we can see from this pawn push that white's only plan is to push these two pawns down the board and promote them into queens. It is pretty clear that the static balance for black is negative, as he's unable to neutralize these connected passed pawns. With that being said, black's only hope is to go for dynamic approach. After a bit of a shuffle, we can see that black has finally played this move, e5. And this move actually weakens black's pawn structure because white can just put his rook on e1, where it will attack this exposed pawn on e5. However, this move also allows a lot of options for black. One move would be pushing the pawn to e4, where it will further harass this light square bishop, forcing it to move away. Another move would be d4, allowing a trade with the c3 pawn, where it will separate white's connected passed pawns. After f4, e4, bishop to e2, rook to b8, and rook to b1, black played this move d4, threatening to fork white's bishop and the rook. White played this move bishop to c4, and after pawn takes pawn, white's only option is to take with the rook, and after the trade and bishop to b4, black is regaining this pawn on a4, and even though white can take this pawn on e4, we can see that this position is way easier to defend than in the previous position. Lastly, let's take a look at an example where dynamic approach and static balance are both being considered. In this position, black played this move knight to c5, attacking white's queen, and it is impossible for white to both defend this pawn on b2 and attack this pawn on d4. A move like queen to c2 would allow this pawn to d3, forking white's queen and the knight. A move like queen to d2 would allow this knight to b3, forking white's queen and the rook. However, white made a decision to allow this fork on b3, and after bishop e5 and the trade, we can see that this knight has brought us just enough the stability to protect the queen side and controlling the center. The pawn on e5 is being attacked, so black played the move queen to d6. Next, rook to c8 is going to come, and there's no way for us to defend this pawn on a4. So here, it is time for us to seek for dynamic approach, and h4 is being played. After a few moves, since this is a blitz game and both sides are low on time, white has finally switched gears once again to go for stability. He allowed this queen trade, and after more trades, white has managed to trade off black's central pawns and has his own passed pawn on the a file. After rook b4, a5, rook a4, and e5, black cannot take this pawn on a5 because it would allow knight to c6, forking the rook and the fork on e7. With the upcoming superior knight on c6 and the passed pawn on a5 and d5, it is pretty clear that white is able to draw this position or even go for a win. In the future, pay attention to stability and dynamics. You'll find it easier to defend in a losing position.